Ahead and open up the Wednesday, March 4th Zionsville Board of Zoning Appeals meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Dale, if you would take attendance.
Katie Glenn.
Present.
Josh Fedor.
Present.
Jim Hurst.
Present.
Josh Martin. Present. Amanda Miller is absent. We have a quorum of 4.
All right. In our packets, we had received the meeting minutes from the February 4th, 2025 BZA meeting. I trust you've taken the opportunity to review them. Any amendments to those minutes? If not, may I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Fedor. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you for that. All right. Docket 2025-40-UV, a use variance pursuant to section 1904079 to provide for the use of car wash in the rural Michigan overlay. That petitioner has requested to withdraw the petition. We really just need to affirm that. So can I get a motion affirming their withdrawal?
Yeah.
Move that it's withdrawn.
All right. Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it's going to be a quick meeting. All right, thank you for that. There is no continued business. There is no new business. So under other matters to be considered, Mr. Dale will again address with you, the first time for me, what they intend to do on some lot coverage issues. This really is Mr. Dale just informing the BZA. This is not something that we will have discussion on or have questions on. Mr. Dale, please proceed.
Okay, you have 2 memos. The first dated October 30, 2025, where I wrote that we will be changing how we calculate lot coverage within the town's jurisdiction. And then a second memo stating that to address this issue of lot coverage, we are going to propose an amendment to the zoning code that would be initially presented to the Plan Commission, and then the Plan Commission will decide whether to forward that a recommendation to the Town Council. So that's all I wanted to let you know that there's the first memo dated 10/30. We expect to implement that this change of interpretation of the code if the proposed text amendment is not received favorably by the Plan Commission or Town Council. So in other words, we tend to remain status quo with how we have been calculating lot coverage for the time being. If the Town Council were to adopt a text revision, then we would not need this first memo because we would have a change in definition for lot coverage. However, if the Town Council decide, no, we don't want to change how the code is written, then we would go along with this first memo dated 10/31/25.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. We appreciate being informed. We have a quorum issue at the April 1st meeting. And so we need to set a date for that next meeting. What does availability look like and I'm sorry, I don't have a calendar up yet, for the week of April 6th. Thank you. The week of April 6th. I, for one, can make myself available any of those evenings.
Yeah, we're back from break I'm available.
Okay, so we have at least 2. Mr. Martin?
Looks like I'm available every day except Tuesday and Thursday.
Okay, so Monday,
week.
Wednesday, or really oddly, a Friday, I guess.
Hope not.
So you're
Mr. Fedor?
I'm completely open those weeks. So.
Okay, so Monday or Wednesday is what you would work for you, Mr. Martin. Is that something that's available for staff and an appropriate room, Mr. Dale, or do you need to look into it?
I don't know, Jonathan, Do you have access to the
I'm sorry,
calendar?
Mr.
Room
That's,
calendar?
that's what I'm looking at right
Okay.
now. Wednesday, April 8th, let's see, at 6:30. Unfortunately, at 6:30 is Park Board. Are y'all available during the day? Or do we need to have an evening meeting? Let's look.
That's a question I had not contemplated yet, so let me look.
The 6th is out, then Jonathan, April 6th.
Oh, that's what I'm looking now, April 6th. April 6th appears to be available. Monday, April 6th. We can start at 6:30.
It would work for me, yeah.
Sounds good to me. Do we
It
need to make a
Sounds like you have
motion?
at least 4. Do we need a motion? All right. We need a motion to move the April BZA meeting to April 6th.
So moved.
All right, do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. And real quick, do we need to do a new public noticing for changing of the date of that meeting?
Notice anyone who has requested notice?
But we don't have to do like a public notice
That's
as
correct.
the town.
We need to notify the newspaper?
That's, I will let the
Yeah,
petitioners
but the
know.
petitioners will need to notice appropriately, and then, but
Yeah.
the newspapers, if they've asked for a notice of all your meetings, you'll need to notify them there's been a change.
Okay.
And then you'll need to post the agenda like you normally do, 48 hours.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Okay, and now to the whole reason I do this is to receive training from Mr. Taylor, BZA training.
Good evening. You all, you've had a good year, you've done a good job. Tonight, I'm going to challenge you with some things, try to get better even. So this year, we have 2 significant cases to talk about BZAs. Not as many as last year, but pretty important cases. We're going to focus a little on findings of fact, and we're going to drill down a little on 2 types of cases you handle. We don't handle as often, but are more difficult cases, and those are use variances and special exceptions. So if you'll turn to page 2 with me, and I'll try to tell you where I am in your materials. The law is very specific about what findings have to be made for each case. And the courts have said that findings of fact which merely restate the statutory criteria are not specific enough. And in one case, they said, as a reviewing court, if someone were to appeal, the judges need to understand what you were thinking. So if you think that, for example, we talk a lot about undue hardship, but if you think that that was not met, then we just need to say why. And the why or because is really good. If we just say, I move we deny because there is no undue hardship, the courts say that's not enough. However, if you say, I move we deny because although it satisfies the first 2 criteria, I find there is no undue hardship because the property could be used as a residence. That's enough, okay? So I think that you'll see on page 2, under D, it says a compliant set of findings, and this is for a development standards variance, would look like this. And you'll see I bolded the word because in each of those examples. And it's what comes after the because, which is so important to a nice set of findings of fact. And so, now then you might say, well, how do we do this? The art of making findings, I think, all starts with asking questions and asking questions about these findings, about the factors themselves. And I'll talk more about this, but you'll hear a theme of avoid curiosity and be precise in your questions. And so, I was at a BZA meeting recently where the first question was on a special exception for a drive-through was, what kind of food are you going to serve? And of course, I thought, who cares? That's not what we're here for. We have 3 factors we're looking at, so let's get on with it. If you go, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but that's just really, really important that we understand what our job is in terms of making motions and having discussion. The more we can talk about the statutory factors and the factors in your ordinance, the better. We need to be able to have the judge who would look at your findings, the staff report, and a transcript of the meeting, be able to know what you were concerned about so that it would appear that the motion was supported by some evidence relevant to the factors. Okay, if you go to page 3, variance of use. Variance of use is an interesting type of case because they could always just rezone, but for reasons sometimes we're unaware of, they've elected to try to get a variance of use. Unlike a development standards variance, your zoning ordinance has 5 factors instead of 3 to look at, and I've laid them out for you. And so again, we will expect a petitioner who wants a use variance to be able to show you these 5 things. Remember, when petitioners stand here and make their case before you, it's their burden to show you that they can satisfy these factors. It's not your job to disprove an item. They're supposed to come and show you. And you will note there that unnecessary hardship keeps staring us in the face, and it's one of the factors here as well. An unnecessary hardship is a tough standard, really, really tough standard. And so we have always told you that, look, what that means, and Josh does a good job in his staff reports, he says it every time, what undue hardship means, unnecessary hardship means, it means that all facts taken together, the property cannot reasonably be put to a conforming use. Can't make a return, that sort of language. So what have the courts said? Well, this year we had the Beaver Gravel Company case out of Noblesville, I will tell you. It's not in the name of the case because the city of Noblesville chose not to participate in the appeal. A neighbor brought the appeal. So the BZA granted a use variance for a gravel pit in an agricultural district, and it was not allowed. So they asked for a use variance, and the BZA granted it. And a neighbor appealed the case. The city did not participate, and the court said, well, you know, you had all kinds of reasons for granting it. You said what the reasons were, but those have nothing to do with undue hardship. And so if you'll flip back with me to the last page, page 22, you'll see this case. I want to talk about it for a little bit. It's a huge case that gave us guidance as to what unnecessary hardship is and whether we were telling you correctly, and the good news is we were, but the court did a good job, and you can see how it gets applied to the facts. So in that case, the BZA relied upon the following to say that this should be good. They said, number one, areas around this have been mined for gravel. Number two, they said the roads in the area are so bad, it probably won't develop residentially. And 3, unless we give the variance, they cannot get these valuable minerals out of the ground. So let me take those one by one. First, what is happening in the area may be relevant, but that is really not dispositive on unnecessary hardship. Because if we know the rule of unnecessary hardship, can you make a reasonable return? Could it be used as agriculture? Yes, the court said. Can you make a reasonable return on land in agriculture? Yes, the court said. And so right there, that one gets knocked out. The reviewing court said, what are you guys thinking? That has nothing to do with unnecessary hardship. Secondly, the roads in the area are so bad, this area is not likely to be developed. Again, you go right back to, could it be used as ag? Sure. Are there really crappy roads in agricultural areas? Often, yes, right? And then we run heavy equipment down it. So again, the court said, well, you're talking about things you might want to talk about, but that has nothing to do with the criteria about unnecessary hardship because you're focusing on the wrong things. And then lastly, they said, you said that unless they get the use variance, they can't take these very valuable minerals out of the ground. And the court said, isn't that kind of like saying it's not permitted? Right, it's not permitted, that's why we're here. But you're asking the wrong question. Can it still be used for some other return? Yes, it can be used for agricultural and residential use. And the fact that those minerals cannot be extracted, well, tough. The legislative body said, we don't want mining in this district. They're the ones who get to decide that. And in order to grant a use variance, you, the BZA, have to be able to point to facts about unnecessary hardship, and that's not one of them. So then what the mining company did is they said, well, all that being true, we can make a lot more money mining than we can in agriculture. And the court said, not relevant either. The question isn't whether you can make a higher return on your investment. It is merely whether you can make any return on your investment. So in this case, the court said the BZA did not analyze the issue of unnecessary hardship in the right way, and that none of these other concerns they have create unnecessary hardship. So this is a great case which says, oh, we should say, oh, that's how we do that. Now the court has told us that when we review that, when we say, Jonathan says what it is and he's correct, and we talk about how tough it is to meet, this case shows you how tough that standard is to meet. Even though they could make more money doing something else and all these other factors, the court said that's not enough. And they had a lot to talk about, still not enough. Okay, if you'll go back then with me to page 3. So if you want to use variance, tall order is what the court is saying. Good luck. That's going to be really difficult to do. Economic, you can see at the bottom, cannot yield a reasonable return, the Beaver case. Economic loss is not enough. It doesn't matter that you could make more money. In the Utica Township case, which we talked about last year, a township fire department bought a residential house in a subdivision on the corner and put a fire substation in. In that case, they didn't ask anyone. So when Jonathan, the planner, went knocking on the fire department door and said, hey, look, this is a residential district, you can't have a fire department, the township fire department said, well, we're already here. And he said, well, you're gonna have to get a use variance. So they applied for a use variance. And in that case, the court said, no, it can be used as a house. Get out of here. That's not unnecessary hardship. And the hardship can't be self-created, so the fact that you went ahead and did it is of no avail to you. And so that's a good example too. And again, there's another reference to the Beaver Gravel case. I really like that case. It validated a lot of what I think has been the law for a long time in Indiana, but it's always good to get a little reminder. On page 4, you'll see a discussion about special exceptions. Now, special exceptions are rare, but when they come in, they come to you for a very specific purpose. There are, I counted, 79 types of uses that require special exception in your ordinance. That's a lot. And yet we don't hear them, but the reason this exists is because unique characteristics of certain uses and potential adverse impacts have led the town council to say, we don't want this use to happen unless the BZA approves it and takes a good, hard look. So that is those are your marching orders. When you have someone come in with a special exception, we want to make sure we're looking at unusual characteristics of the use and impacts to the neighbors. Those are the two things we're looking for. So when you look at the criteria, it starts to make a little sense. So there are really 3 criteria, 1 standard, and 5 additional considerations. But I'll take them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. First, you cannot get a special exception unless it's specifically listed as available for a special exception in your use table. Staff will let you know about that. Secondly, it cannot be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. So certain types of uses like gravel pits, for example, or things that make loud noise, things that cause the ground to vibrate, things like that, they're always going to get a look because of potential impacts. And will it be detrimental? Impact on property values, much like a rezone, we're going to look at that and say, is this going to have a detrimental impact on property values? And then the last one is consistent with character and uses in the area and the comprehensive plan. Now, this is where a lot of my boards of zoning appeals get a little hung up because they don't deal with the comprehensive plan every day. So when you have a special exception case, you need to drag that comp plan out and read it. What does the comp plan say about this particular area? What uses are intended? What uses are favored? What are disfavored? Or sometimes a comprehensive plan will say we don't want the following things in this district. And so that's when you need to this is when our job gets a little harder. We're not just dealing with the ordinance. Now we have to jump over to the comprehensive plan and talk about the town's vision for a certain area. Character and uses tends to talk about, is it harmonious with the other uses in the area, or is it disharmonious? So a gravel pit in an agriculture residential area, those are the kind of decisions you have to make. Additional considerations, and so your town council gave you some latitude here. It said, hey, while you're doing all of that, make sure you consider everything else. And they gave you a list of really broad sorts of issues that you can look at for a special exception. I'm glad they did, because the law says that if the petitioner can show you they can satisfy all of these factors, your decision is non-discretionary. So this list of additional considerations, might give you some latitude to do what you think is best. Okay, if you go to page 5, what I have done here to try to take the abstract to the application, I've given you an example. And I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but so I took a gravel pit case in an agricultural area, the Beaver gravel case. I looked at your ordinance and I said, what if we had that case here? What would we do? What would we say? And so a gravel pit in an agricultural district in your ordinance is listed as a special exception. So it would come to you. It wouldn't have to be a use variance, it would be a special exception. So then again, I've just said, look, you're going to have to ask questions based upon these factors and all these others, and I've given you some ideas about what to focus on. I do this merely to illustrate how you take the theory behind special exceptions and apply it to a real case, which is what you're asked to do. Every time you have this case, it's just that we don't have special exception cases very often. When we have them, though, they tend to be pretty significant cases. They really do. Special exceptions tend to be, ooh, wait, no one knew that was allowed there. And the town council's message to you, if they've designated that way, is we need you to look hard at this one. And so that's what I would keep in mind whenever you have those cases. Okay, if you'll go to page 6. I have given you in the materials, and I'm not going to read the materials to you, but some information about the types of cases that you have. Now, one other type of case we don't have very often are administrative appeals. And this is where you get your name, the Board of Zoning Appeals, because nothing is an appeal that comes before you except this type of case. And this type of case it exists for someone who believes that the staff has misinterpreted or misapplied the ordinance. And so, not that Jonathan can't be the last word, but he's not the last word. If someone believes that staff has not applied the ordinance in the correct way, they can appeal a determination made by staff to you. And your decision is, was the staff right or was the staff wrong? You can affirm the decision of the staff or reject it, or you can modify it. So these types of appeals, as you can see, are rare but very important. Often they come down to the meaning of one word or the meaning of two words and what those mean. And so you can see in the Brownsburg Conservation Club, the court said the BZA, they act like a court and they decide, was it legal or illegal? You see at the bottom of page 1, speaking of words, this was a case I was involved with, and the question was whether the company's name was obscene. The company name was going to be on a sign. And the staff did not think that name was obscene, but a local church did. And 300 people came to a meeting to talk about it. 300. And the Board of Zoning Appeals affirmed the staff by a vote of 3-2. Despite, Josh, you would be humored, despite my telling them what the Supreme Court says obscenity is, the name of the company related to a donkey hauling coffee beans down a mountain in Hawaii. If you go to page 7, the City of Noblesville case was all about a sign repair. And so the sign company moved the sign 3 feet, and the city of Noblesville took the position that was a relocation. And the court said, no, 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 it isn't. They moved it, we'll grant you that, but the word relocate and move are not the same. And talk about getting into Webster's dictionary a little bit, that's what the courts do. And so they said that the staff was incorrect in this particular case because they equated the word relocation with move it. They said if you move something 1 inch, that is not a relocation. How far do you have to move it for it to be relocation? They didn't say, but they said it's certainly more than 3 feet. And then the Greenfield Avenue Properties case, this was simply a discussion of whether a drug rehabilitation center, whether that service was covered under the umbrella of the word church. And in that case, they said no. The church argued that it was because it was part of their mission, and the court said, no, those are different things. That, unless there's something in an ordinance which says that's allowed, we don't think that's what is meant by the word church. The bottom of page 7, you'll see a brief review of development standards variances. These are the most common cases by far you see. I think you guys do a really good job, but just a couple things to remember. On page 8 are the required findings. It's a discretionary approval, which means even if the petitioner can convince you on all 3, it's still up to you. And I always say that your discretion should be, if they can get that far, is it still in the best interest of the town to grant this? That's what that's about. You can also impose conditions on an approval. If you deny it, you don't have to worry about conditions. On page 9, variance of use, which we've already talked about, but there's some more information there. You can also have conditions for that. On page 10 is a little more on special exceptions. And then on page 11, before you start looking at the 79 uses, I want to draw your attention to number 7, conditions. And there's a great case which said, look, you cannot just put any conditions you want. There are factors. And so when you think about imposing a condition, you have to satisfy these 6 factors that are in the Schlusser case, City of Seymour. And that is, it must be, some of these are simple, but some not so hard. Some are hard. It has to be constitutional, not exceed the scope of the BZA's authority, not offend any provision of the zoning ordinance, not require legal conduct. 5 and 6 are the important ones. Be in the public interest. 6, be reasonably calculated to achieve a legitimate objective of the zoning ordinance. So let me stop there. You might ask yourself, how am I to know what the legitimate objectives of the zoning ordinance are? Well, it's in the zoning ordinance. Right in the beginning of the zoning ordinance, it says the purpose of this zoning ordinance are. So if we were challenged on a condition, it would be my job to say, well, when Josh Fedor wanted that condition to be on there, what he was trying to do was make sure we didn't have a problem with drainage. And in the introduction of our zoning ordinance, it says that one of our purposes is to ensure that we have adequate drainage. So Josh is golden. He has what we call the nexus, the magic language. Okay? And then secondly, if it's traffic, your zoning ordinance says one of the things we're trying to do is manage traffic. So if you impose a condition that has to do with traffic, you're fine. But if you impose conditions that are not related to any of those general purposes, just because we want to, then we're going to have trouble. And then number 7 is really heavy. The condition cannot impose unnecessary burdens on the landowner. So a lot of my clients, my boards of zoning appeals, plan commissions, they sometimes get a little carried away with conditions, in my opinion, and I have to talk to them a little bit about, well, now, this condition that you want to impose, what purpose is it related to? And if they can, again, if they can come back to something that is a legitimate purpose, then we say, okay, is there any other way to do this? Is there an alternative way to do it that doesn't impose such a burden on the petitioner? So I would just tell you, use conditions only when you feel you really have to, because it is not a blank check. It's not. There are rules about what we can do. Okay, if you'll go to page 13. This whole thing about making findings, I call the art of making findings, because I do think it takes some practice. But the number one thing you can do is ask questions about the factors. You might notice I didn't say ask questions and stop there. Ask questions about the factors. So I'll tell you a secret, I sometimes keep score. Every question you ask, I'll either put it in the is related to a factor or is not related to a factor. Like what's on your menu is not, that night I said not related. It wasn't you, but not related. So I find the best practice is read your staff materials, think about what questions you should ask, write them down before the meeting, and then at the last minute do the which factor does this, this is number 1. Is this injurious? Oh no, this is hardship. Okay, that's number 3. And I think I'd check yourself on that. Now you might say, well, why is Dan so concerned about this? Here's why. Number 1, that's our job. But number 2 is if you ask questions that are not related to the factors and you deny it, a petitioner might say the reason they denied it was because they didn't like my menu in my example. And one of them said, that's just what we need, another chicken place in town. Even if the BZA had a valid reason. All this superfluous conversation we have sometimes opens us up for accusations. In the same respect, if you grant one, members of your community may say, well, they were talking a lot about things that didn't have to do with anything, and the real reason they granted it was because they like that company or they love Ford cars or whatever it happens to be. And so, for example, I had a case once where it was a car dealer case, and they were very concerned about what cars were going to be sold. And I always say, that's a question you can ask after the hearing, because we don't care what kind of cars are going to be sold. We might be curious, but curiousness is our enemy, because it allows us to stray away from factors. Remember, as you see at the bottom there, the petitioner has the burden, so ask questions to draw out evidence on the factors, and I've given you on pages 13 and 14 and 15 examples of questions that might relate to factors. If you go to page 15, part of my job is to tell you about conflicts of interest every year, so I will just tell you that if you have a direct or indirect financial interest in a case, you can't participate. You have to recuse yourself. You do that by telling the secretary, it would be Mr. Dale, and you have to leave the room because we don't want you influencing anyone. So we just have you leave the room, and then when that case is over, we'll come get you. You also cannot participate in a case if you are biased, prejudiced, or otherwise unable to be impartial. So it may just be that you have a case where you know the person and you think, oh, I really, really, really don't like them. I just don't think I could grant anything they're asking for. I don't trust them. I had a bad experience. Well, if that's the case, recuse yourself. Or you might say, oh my God, that's my best friend in the whole world. I could never vote against them. That's bias, and this prejudice is kind of negative bias is the other way. So it all relates to whether or not you can be impartial. The fact that you know a petitioner or you know the neighbor who's remonstrating does not automatically mean that you have a conflict of interest or that you should recuse yourself. It all goes back to whether you can be impartial. And you know you have a job to do, and if you can do that despite knowing some people, that's fine. The courts have even said that friendship alone is not enough to say that you can't be partial. You can say, well, he's my neighbor, we're friends, but I'll listen to the evidence, I'll do my job. And this was the case. This was a big case that came out of Madison County. It was a solar farm case. And of course, the chair of the BZA knew everyone, and they said that doesn't disqualify her. Knowing people doesn't disqualify you. And she submitted an affidavit saying, I did my job, I made my decision on the factors, and that decision was upheld. You see, no one turns on you until they disagree with you. A petitioner might seem friendly until you rule against them, and then they say, well, somebody was prejudiced against me, or someone didn't like me. And it can be said by members of the community too. One of the ways, you look at the top of page 16, you may wonder, how would someone know I'm prejudiced? And the case after case after case, the evidence shows that a member of the BZA went to coffee and told his friends, in the case I'm thinking of, that he was never going to approve that. Since he did that before the meeting, before he heard the evidence, that was a basis to have that questioned. So I tell you each year, your BZA members, you're quasi-judicial, you're like judges, you should not discuss cases prior to the meetings. You should only consider what you hear in this room. You shouldn't drive out there and walk around on the same, like Planning Commission members can do this, but not BZA. The only thing you consider is what you hear here. If you tell people before the meeting you've already made up your mind, guess what? We've got a problem. So be careful about that. Be careful of what you say. It literally was a coffee shop. This case was a county commissioner. He went to the same coffee shop every Wednesday morning with the same guys, the very creative petitioners who were denied, just deposed 5 guys, and they all, this guy ever talk about this case? Sure he did. Did he say how he was gonna make his decision? Yeah, he told us he was never gonna approve it. Well, why not? It was a mega church. It's out in Colorado, and they said, oh, his church is about 35 people, and he hates mega churches. He's just not going to ever grant it. And of course, that's a problem. So just remember that. Also, if you do have a pecuniary interest, which means you would make money if it's approved, then they don't have to show you're biased or it affected your opinion. That's an automatic disqualification. So even if you say, well, look, I am going to make some money because that was approved or denied, but they don't have to prove that it really affected your decision. It's just an automatic. Religious uses on page 16. There is a federal law called the Religious and Institutionalized Persons Act. We call it RLUIPA. And it says that if a religious organization or entity comes before us in the planning world, we have to treat them like everybody else. We cannot discriminate against them because they are a religious entity. And of course, because of that rule, we cannot ask them any questions about their religious practices or beliefs. And again, when you hear me say curiosity is sometimes our enemy, I have seen this before. It is irrelevant. If they won't name their church or tell you what church it is, we don't need to know the name of their church. We're supposed to treat it just like it's a hospital being built or a school or whatever else. But that's federal law. The Access to Public Records Act says that any documents you create, whether they be paper or digital, about the business of the Board of Zoning Appeals, that's available to the public. So certainly the things in the staff file, they're all available, but your emails and text messages regarding business of the BZA is a public document. And it is so even if it's on your personal devices. So I urge you to be careful what you say and to make sure that, it's certainly not recommended that you email or text about cases. If you want to email and text about when is the meeting, has it been moved, that's fine. but I once had to go through 10,000 text messages. That's how many were related to the business at hand, 10,000. And that was an experience. But somebody had to pay me to go through 10,000 emails or text messages too. So, but even if it's on your device, now also if you use your device for that purpose, and I don't recommend that you do, but if you do, you also have a duty to preserve those for 3 years because that's state law. So be careful. Open door law says you can't meet, a majority of you can't meet and receive information or make decisions or discuss things. That's the open door law. So again, just remember, now where this is tricky is sometimes after the meeting when you're hanging out, if I separate you because 3 of you are together, you'll know why, but even, so just try not to do that. That sort of transparency leads to more confidence by the community. But if they see 5 of you huddled in the back of the room immediately after a meeting, they might think they don't know what you're talking about. So just be careful. You will see on page 17 some examples, but sometimes we run into the same issues, so I included these. So on the Stiller Properties case, you'll see that the courts upheld the granting of a variance when the petitioner said, look, I can't just build whatever building I want. I'm a franchisee. They tell me what I can build. And so that's not to say that you couldn't deny, it's just that they upheld that and said, that is a factor you can consider. Whether the franchisee has any control here, you can consider that. In the Union Township case, we talked about what unnecessary hardship is. That's an important case. I've listed it like 3 times in your materials. The number 4 there, you'll see the what I call the storage unit case, and that is, there was a case where the remonstrator who had a storage business said, we don't need any more storage businesses in Maryville. We have like 6, and how many, can we have? And you will hear this argument. Do we need another car dealership? Do we need another whatever, restaurant? And the court said, look, it's not the BZA's job to regulate the free market or to encourage or discourage competition. That's not part of our charge. And so just know you don't see that in any of your statutory factors, and it's not our job to protect existing businesses from competition. And it's not my opinion. You can see it's a case. And then number 5 at the bottom is kind of important. That's the Mammoth Solar case. And what happened there was, this is a staff issue. Staff started this problem. But in that case, there were like 13 different categories of documents that had to be submitted to staff before a case came to the BZA. And staff decided 3 of them really weren't important. And so when it got to the BZA, they also didn't object to the lack of information around these 3 items. And they ended up approving an industrial solar project. And the people who lived in that area remonstrated. They filed an appeal. They made a very interesting argument. They said, look, you have this ordinance. It's not up to Jonathan to decide what must be submitted. Your ordinance, your town council said this must be done. And although it seemed like Jonathan might just be streamlining this, what he really did was, this is a unique argument, he prevented the public from having the information we need to remonstrate. We can't make our argument unless we have all this information, and neither the staff nor the BZA can waive that. And the courts agreed in a decision that shocked a lot of people. And so if you see that there are 13 things that have to be submitted and you don't have any evidence of that, and Jonathan says, I just didn't think that was important, that's probably a time you're going to need to continue that case and ask Jonathan to go back and get it. On page 18, there are best practice suggestions I have for you. I'd like you to look at those. That's just some of my best advice to you. And then back to page 22. Before I let you go, I just want to talk about one more case, and it was really important. So last year, I told you about the Monroe County versus Bedford recycling case. That case, in that case, the BZA granted a variance, and then their attorney, who, you know how we are, we think we know everything, said, I think the staff made a mistake here. The staff said this was a recycling facility, but I think now that we've heard the evidence, it was pretty clear that it was a junkyard, not a recycling center. And of course, that mattered because one was permitted with a special exception, the other one wasn't permitted at all. Would have required a rezone. And so the attorney, see, the last one's your fault, this one's my fault, okay? The attorney went to the BZA at the next meeting and said, I'm going to need you to vote on that again, and I recommend that you change your mind. So they revoked their grant because their attorney told them to. And so the petitioner appealed that and said, they can't change their mind. And the Court of Appeals said, yeah, they can change their mind, especially if it's based on a mistake of law. The Supreme Court of Indiana said they can't do that. And why can't they do that? It sounds like a good idea, but the statute doesn't say they can. And in the statute, it says what you can do, what kind of cases you hear, and it doesn't say that you can revoke your decisions after you make them. And the Supreme Court said until the legislature says you can change your mind, once you decide on a case, that's it. I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Well, Dan, I'm curious about a few things. Oh, come on. So, looking, page 17H, defending the BZA decision on appeal B, the decision is an abuse of discretion. Of the different types of cases that come before the BZA, which cases do we have discretion in? In other words, it checked all the boxes, but we go, never mind, we don't want it anyway.
A development standards variance and a use variance, or where you have discretion. And so abuse of discretion means that even though you say you were exercising your discretion, there was no evidence to support your decision. Which is why, if they do check all the boxes and you say, no, I don't want it, you need to say why.
Articulate it.
Good question.
You hit pretty hard on how high of a hurdle unnecessary hardship is. I've heard rumor there's a different standard that some communities use. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the other standard people use is practical
Which
difficulty.
is not here in Zionsville.
Right, it's practical difficulty. So as it relates to development standards variances and use variances, sometimes the communities will use practical difficulties for both. Some use practical difficulties for development standards, and for a use variance, they use unnecessary hardship. There's a distinction there. You use unnecessary hardship for both, which is a very high standard. But there was some discussion about that a couple of years ago, about whether that should be changed, and I think the town council wanted to keep it the way it is. But yeah, that's what I would say most communities use practical difficulty for development standards and use unnecessary hardship on use variance. Historically, the idea of a use of unnecessary hardship comes from use variance law. And again, it wasn't traditionally thought of as the default standard for development standard variances. But the law says you can use practical difficulty for development standard variance, or you can use unnecessary hardship. But I think vast majority of municipalities use practical difficulties, which simply means it costs money or it creates problems. It does not go as far as unnecessary hardship.
Might one suggest it offers a little bit of discretion on how an individual BZA member might view it?
Oh, practical difficulty, you mean?
Yes.
Sure. It's much lower standard, in my opinion, much lower.
And in your experience in other communities using it, are the BZA members and staff less likely to be at odds on things?
I don't know. I just think that the people who prefer to use practical difficulty would say, look, it's still discretionary. The BZA still decides yes or no. So this standard, which is lower, doesn't take away that discretion. So the BZA can still do what they want to do. It just, again, as the new case out of Noblesville shows you, That's unnecessary hardship is an incredibly difficult standard. It does pigeonhole the staff a little bit.
And thank you for bringing it to that, because I think that was really the point I was trying to drive to. In my time on BZA and having watched meetings before joining the BZA, sometimes staff does, I don't want to speak for staff. I get the sense the staff doesn't think what's being proposed is a bad idea, but it doesn't meet unnecessary hardship, so they have to say it doesn't meet unnecessary hardship.
Yeah, I think it goes right back to what I was saying. A more flexible approach is, if your standard's practical difficulty, it's still up to you. But if the standard is unnecessary hardship and they don't meet it, you have to deny it. So see, it really makes it a more rigid regime of review.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One question, Dan, on quorum, and now that we all spend enough time in this room already, but if three of us showed up at a town council meeting, and we're in the audience, would that be, if it's a public meeting, would that still be constituted as a quorum where someone could?
It's a very good question. No, there was a case on this out of Boone County. That is, yeah, what if a majority of your governing body shows up at a meeting of another governing body, and the court said that's not a violation yet. But if three of you speak at that meeting on an issue, it just became a meeting for you, because now you're talking.
So, let's say Jim and I are both on planning commission. If Josh shows up, remonstrates against a development on the planning commission side, would that be considered?
No, you dual membership people, I create a special issue. You two create lots of special issues, but when you're at the plan commission meeting, you have your plan commission hat on, and you're not a member of the BZA at that meeting. So Josh, you go ahead and come and say whatever you want. But it's a good question. So the key is what happened in that case that we're talking about was a county council case where they were arguing about how much the county was paying in attorney's fees. And this was several years ago, but it led to a really interesting case because there are three commissioners. Two of them got up and spoke and actually got in kind of an argument with the council. And the local newspaper said, this looks like a meeting of the commissioners. And the public access counselor said, you're exactly right. That became a meeting. Them being there, just sitting there, did not create a meeting, but now it's a meeting. So I typically advise BZA members, don't go to the plan commission meeting unless you really have to. And same, don't go to the town council meeting. If if three of you show up, it's not my preference, because then I don't know what you'll say or do. So I just think you have to be aware of that rule. Yeah, three of you show up at somewhere. Is it a meeting? Well, it depends on what happens next, and I'd rather not worry about it. So it would be better if you wanted to, say, be heard, or wanted the town council or the plan commission to hear something, you had to say would be to choose someone and let them be your spokesperson.
In other words, stay at home and watch the town council meetings on YouTube, right?
Yes, that's fine. There is another way to watch, right?
Well, taking all of that in stride, I remain a citizen of Zionsville, and I'm going to go to public meetings if it, yeah.
Well, two of you can go. Just the third one is where we have a problem. I've been told that before, and it's not, no one's going to sue me. So I'm just giving you good advice. Hey, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Okay, I believe that concludes our business. Is there anything else any BZA member wish to address? All right, I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
On